Just past 7:34 in the morning. The show is up front. My name's Brian Edwards-Tiekert. As we move down the ballot and get closer to Election Day, we like to cover places where first of their kind policy proposals are going to voters. And one of those instances is here in Berkeley, where voters will decide on a first of its kind tax on fossil gas consumption meant to advance the city's climate goals. Measure GG would only apply to large buildings over 15,000 square feet. It would charge the building's owners, not their tenants. The tax is big. The tax would be about as much as the cost of gas itself, and it would raise an estimated $27 million per year in a relatively small city. That money would then subsidize building decarbonization projects. When we cover an initiative, we always start by telling you where the money is coming from. The Yes on GG campaign has raised just under $100,000, with the biggest chunk coming from SEIU Local 10 to 1. The No campaign has raised about $370,000, with the biggest chunks coming from state and federal realtor associations and the property management company Wareham Development. Joining us for the debate on the pro side, Daniel Tahara, who serves on Berkeley's Environment and Climate Commission, but is here only representing the Yes on Measure GG campaign. Good morning to you.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to talk to you. And on the con side, Emily Winston is founder and CEO of Boichik Bagels, which has their factory in West Berkeley. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.
So, Daniel, since you're in the affirmative, we'll start with you. Take 2 minutes. Why should Berkeley have its own fossil gas tax?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the really great context setting about what Measure GG is. Just to reiterate, GG is a carbon tax on owners of the largest buildings in Berkeley for their pollution caused by the use of methane gas. And the primary purpose here is to raise money to fund green upgrades for homes and businesses for all Berkeleyans, including some of the very same businesses subject to the tax, and with a particular focus on low-income communities and restaurants. Now, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but the reason we need something like Measure GG is not just for the climate itself. Obviously, the climate's a huge concern, and we're already feeling the effects locally. But the reason we need something like Measure GG very urgently is because of two impending cost burdens on our community, Berkeley specifically. The first is that starting in 2027, new regulations will come into effect that will ban the installation of gas, water, and space heaters in buildings. And for many buildings in Berkeley, compliance will require not just the cost of the new equipment, but the cost of electrical upgrades that can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And all told, the city estimates that the total cost to upgrade will be close to $1 billion. This is money that people just don't have lying around generally. And when your water heater breaks, the last thing you want to do is go through a costly and expensive upgrade. And the second kind of big cost burden that Measure GG tries to address comes from spiraling gas rates, which are projected to increase over 900% in the coming decades. And this is a huge problem for low-income tenants in particular, but really everyone who doesn't have that much control over the efficiency of their buildings, and living in drafty homes or stuck with gas, et cetera. And Measure GG would actually provide an incentive and financial support to improve the efficiency of buildings and electrify buildings so that our tenants who are particularly energy burdened can live in not only more affordable homes, but also more comfortable homes. And so all that to say is that a Yes on GG vote is a vote to ensure that all our residents can continue to stay in their homes and are not financially burdened by these huge costs related to the climate transition. And perhaps equally importantly, it's a vote to allow.
Okay, we're at time, so before we get to equally importantly, we will go to Emily Winston, who is arguing against Measure GG in Berkeley. Why oppose the tax on natural gas consumption?
Sure. Well, first of all, it doesn't double the price of gas. It actually starts at about tripling the price of natural gas that everyone would pay for it, and then it goes up annually. CPI, so an inflation rate plus 6%. So if we say inflation is about 3%, we're looking at a 9% annual increase in this fee, which is a huge growth. So the fee actually starts at just under $3 a therm, and it goes to over 9x over the lifetime of this bill. So the thing is, especially with commercial real estate in large buildings, the owner never pays fees. Everything is called a triple net lease with commercial real estate. And all the fees that are assessed to the building get passed on to the tenants. So you can't say that these fees would not get passed to the tenants, because they very, very clearly with commercial real estate would absolutely. The landlord does not eat that at all. So no building owner is going to be stuck with this bill. It'll all go directly to the tenants of the buildings. Residential is more complicated, but there is, in the city assessment, they say there's actually for at least 40% of the residential buildings affected by this, there's no way to prevent the landlords actually passing that cost on to their tenants. So it would be raising their rents. You have things like restaurants and industry that are using natural gas for more than just their hot water heaters. And like, for instance, I built a whole new $5 million bakery that runs on natural gas to run the kettles that boil the bagels, and then we run the ovens that bake the bagels. And that's all gas equipment. And in fact, the manufacturer of my oven doesn't even offer an electric option. But I just put all this in. That's a huge investment. There's similar companies making such investments. Fieldwork Brewing, all of their brewing equipment runs on gas. If you want to do a heat process, gas has always been the way to do it. He said that absolutely, if this passes, he's going to move his brewing operations to Richmond. So you're taking the natural gas that you're burning here and you're just moving it to the next town over, and businesses are going to leave as fast as they can with this. And then you're going to not only not collect this money, but you're going to erode your tax base. We also
Emily,
have.
let's drill down a little bit, since you're a
Mhm.
business owner who's impacted, and talk about
Sure.
your situation. Do you own or rent your place in West Berkeley?
I rent it.
You rent it, but
I
you've got
rent.
one of
I
those
yeah.
those
I've got a
those
big
leases that
building, but I
passes through
rent it.
cost to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. And like, what percent of your operating expense is your gas bill?
Oh, I don't know offhand, but I do know I did the calculations that this will cost me some 40, if using the current gas usage I'm using right now, it'll cost, if I just use exactly what I'm using now, it'll cost me $46,000 the first year.
Right,
But I've built this and
$46,000 compared to what? What are you bringing in?
oh, well, that's for the whole, if I'm saying that's the whole, well, I have 9 locations total. So this is doing commissarying for a bunch of other locations. So this is my commissary that I built here in Berkeley. So we're producing the dough and the cream cheese and things for all of our locations. So right now our business is doing $12 million in revenue. But currently our gas bill right now is in the around $25,000 at this rate. So we're saying it'll be an extra $46,000.
Right, on 12 million in
Mhm.
revenue, my calculator's saying
Yeah.
that's about 3.8%.
Okay.
Does that
Okay.
sound like it's the right ballpark?
That's sure.
And so
Okay,
how
but
would
I
that
mhm.
change your business practices? What would you do? Would you raise prices? Would you pull up stakes and
Well,
leave
so
Berkeley?
that's the start point. That's the start point saying I don't use any additional gas, but I built this factory to make bagels. So I'm planning to use actually quite a bit more gas as we increase bagel production. And I plan to stay here for a long time. And that's what could easily go to, I had it at $250,000. This could hit $250,000 in 2029. If we start making the bagels that I built the thing to make.
Right, but if you increase
that goes
production,
up
presumably
fast.
it's because you're increasing revenues. So the
Sure.
question is how much of a pinch it's
Sure.
putting on your
Okay.
margin, not how
But
much of a
that's
pinch
okay,
it's putting
but
on your gross.
Okay, that $250,000 could be going to all sorts of other things. Okay, in the meantime, there's restaurants. So food does not have great margins, and I'm more fortunate than most businesses in the food space. But for instance, everything downtown, so all these restaurants that are on the ground floor of large buildings downtown, those will all be hit with this, and they all have triple net leases. And a lot of those restaurants have very small margins as it is, and they're hanging on by a thread. And this could very easily push them out of business. And Fieldwork has said, they're doing plenty of revenue. Why should they look at this? They say, okay, this is going to be, $100,000 today. It's going to be increasing more and more over the next few years, going up, raising about 9% a year to plan for your business. And we're just going to move out. That's their Fieldwork said, if this passes, we will move out, because it doesn't make business sense to plan on staying here and pay this.
Let's put this question to Daniel Tahara, who's in the affirmative on Measure GG. First of all, Daniel, I want to see if you both agree that for businesses in this situation with a triple net lease, the cost of the tax might be passed from the property owner to the business itself.
Yeah, that's not my understanding of triple net leasing.
So you dispute that actual scenario?
No, sorry. That is my. I agree with you.
That is your understanding. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So then,
not everything.
So then, this is a classic.
Yeah.
This is a classic problem in climate policy. It's called leakage. You can pass really aggressive climate legislation in one jurisdiction, and then manufacturing will just move to the neighboring one and release the same amount of pollution if you don't have coordinated policy. Berkeley's a very small city. So if this tax makes a brewery or a bakery move their gas-fired equipment a mile to West Oakland, what have you achieved other than diminishing the tax basis in the city where it passed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think I want to just sort of take a step back a second. Fieldwork in particular, and many of these businesses have said the same thing for other measures that are very aligned with Berkeley values, like Fair Work Week, minimum wage ordinance. They said, we're going to leave if you pass this, and yet here they are. And so it's a little bit, I think one thing that's been really disappointing to me about this whole process is that, there are all these businesses who, profess on the one hand to want to be part of Berkeley's future and that they value the climate, but they're sort of willing to participate in a campaign that is explicitly misleading the community and holding back on progress, right? Like, you were drilling into the revenue numbers with Emily, it's 0.3% of revenue, not 3.3%, was the math that I got. And if you look at some SEC filings, like there's at least $1 million in profit, at least $1 million in profit a year. And so this idea that, these are just threats. They're threats to leave. There's, more threats to obstruct climate action with further lawsuits if they don't get their way at the ballot box. And there's also a lot of climate denialism, sort of repeatedly suggesting that technology doesn't exist, or heating buildings without fossil fuels is too complicated or too expensive. And so that's been a big frustration. As for the leakage question, the regulations that apply to Berkeley that I mentioned earlier in terms of requiring the installation of gas furnaces and water heaters is actually a regional regulation. And so what we foresee in Berkeley, and these are actually ongoing discussions at the regional level, is like, how do we provide funding to make sure that these regulations don't cause displacement? Because if Measure GG doesn't pass, or something similar to Measure GG doesn't pass, there will be displacement related to these regulations because the costs are very high. And so, Berkeley's always been a leader in climate. And, this is Berkeley saying, hey, other 9 Bay Area county region, like, here's how we think we can solve this problem. And we've gotten a lot of interest from, Oakland, from the peninsula, around, I think, as you mentioned at the top of the show, copy and pasting this measure.
I'm going to go. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say Emily has no problem with the city subsidizing the fossil gas transition for low-income residents, and the issue is with how it's raising the money. So let's focus the discussion on the tax on gas use at businesses. When you designed this to put on the ballot, did you consider the problem of leakage? Did it help inform the number that you arrived at?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a challenge with these measures, in terms of, how do you minimize as many negative impacts as you can? And ultimately, sort of with the leakage question in mind, we designed the spending side of the measure to accommodate as many of these cases as we can. And if we're looking at restaurants in particular, restaurants are explicitly prioritized for funding to decarbonize and to completely eliminate their tax burden. And so,
Yeah, but in the meantime, they'll have several years of getting crushing fees,
Well,
and
Emily
restaurants
Winston,
have very small margins.
let's talk about your situation because you're the one that the No campaign gave us. You've mentioned to other
Okay.
businesses that you think might choose to move out of Berkeley. I take it that's not something Boichik would do.
Like we wouldn't do it anytime soon, but we have a 10-year lease, and I wouldn't want to, and I wouldn't do it lightly. But if we are using, if we grow the way we intend to grow, and we're sitting here looking, I have it that this would hit $1 million in 2045. We may decide that it's in our best interest to leave when our lease is over. It's
Well,
entirely possible.
explain. I assume you think climate change is a problem and that
Yes.
using fossil gas contributes to it. Explain what is stopping you from switching to electric equipment. My understanding is electric resistance heating is very common in industrial bakeries.
For baking bagels, we want it baked on a stone deck in a direct fire oven. And I am not aware of I haven't done trials on it because I don't have that equipment. So there hasn't been much bagel equipment developed for electric. I'd have to do some trials. Can I even make a bagel that tastes the same? Because the firing would be different in the oven, and it's more of a convection oven versus you don't have that direct flame below the stone deck that's heating the bottom crust of the bagel. So there's that. But one of the real kickers is it'd be a huge impact to the grid. So it took us over $150,000 and a year to get an electrical upgrade to this building for what we wanted to do. PG&E is very slow. It's expensive. We had to put in a whole big transformer. They couldn't just give us additional power from the overhead wire that was already in place. And the real kicker is if you make this huge increase in electrical demand, you can't just PG&E can't just turn on more solar panels than they already have. If you need additional marginal electricity, you turn on the natural gas power plant that's say in the Central Valley to create more electricity.
it's actually coming from solar. We curtail a large amount of solar every day. So it would be coming from solar.
The California grid mix, according to the EIA, is still 40% gas. We do not have a perfectly clean grid. And that's a big deal.
We're getting into the minutia of grid regulation here, and I'm not sure that any of the three of us is qualified to debate it. There is curtailment. Some of it is because of transmission bottlenecks. Daniel, Tahara, let me come back to you. You think leakage is theoretically a problem, the idea of businesses pulling up stakes and moving out of town. Emily has a business case where they claim to be uniquely dependent on natural gas and out of pocket a large amount of sunken costs they just put into building a facility in West Berkeley. Like, what do you think should happen for someplace like Boichik Bagels?
Yeah, I mean, I think the city should work with Boichik to figure out what is needed to transition them. But going back to the question of like how was the cost set and how did you think of leakage, right? The way the cost is set, it wasn't just like, hey, we want to raise this much money, so like let's raise this much money, or we want to extract pain. It's set based on what's called social cost of carbon, which is the sort of dollar cost for how much damage this pollution is doing. So it's not as if a business gets a 3-year pause on paying the tax and the damages to the environment and the climate don't happen. Damages to health. I think there's some studies. UCLA did a study and estimated that the health costs alone of natural gas use in the Bay Area are over $1.2 billion a year annually. That's asthma, that's respiratory illness, and all the related things that come from particulate pollution and also the climate pollution. So, you know, these are costs that are incurred by Berkeleyans today, and these are costs that are socialized by the use of natural gas. And so what we're trying to do is, build that cost into the equation of, hey, I'm trying to make a purchasing decision for 20 years. I maybe should give a second look at, adjusting my processes to use electric cooking. I think this happened with 314 Pizza over on Gilman Street. They explicitly said that the Berkeley's gas ban, made them really rethink, how they wanted to run their business. And it got them to think about the climate and showed them that, all electric pizza cooking was both feasible and delicious. And so that's really what
it's different to do that before you build your restaurant.
Emily Winston, this will be
your
closing argument. Go ahead.
Okay, it's when everyone has its investments already, it's a huge deal to rip out equipment and replace it. And it can't happen overnight, and it's extremely expensive. And if you're putting in if we put in a huge amount of additional electric facility, and that power is still coming from natural gas just elsewhere in the state, it's just a NIMBY thing to say, okay, it's okay to burn natural gas in a power plant elsewhere in the state to make clean electricity for us in Berkeley. So that's just putting that gas burning elsewhere. This is a huge thing. It's a very big deal to upgrade your electrical use. And this is putting it unfairly on anyone who just happens to be a tenant in a big building. And you're going to see the restaurants downtown have had a hard go as it is. And you're going to be chasing restaurants out of the city left and right, in addition to the nonprofits hurting and the hospital and all sorts of things that are running on very small margins. So you can say, oh, it's only another small piece of a percent, but every little piece of that percentage of someone's revenue makes a difference. And at some point, what's left in the margin is nothing or negative.
All right, that is Emily Winston, founder and CEO of Boichik Bagels, arguing against Measure GG, which is the city of Berkeley's proposed tax on the use of fossil gas at large buildings, 15,000 square feet and higher. Arguing on the pro side, we had Daniel Tahara, who serves on Berkeley's Environment and Climate Commission, but is here only representing the Yes on Measure GG campaign. Thank you, both of you, for speaking to us this morning.